Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to those of you present here. We also like to extend an invite to those outside. In case you'd like to join in, please feel free to step inside the launch pad for this session based on the jewelry industry SOP, which was unveiled by the Honorable Minister of Commerce and Industry, Government of India, Shri Piyush Goyal, and by the Honorable Deputy Chief Minister of Maharashtra, Dr. Devendra Fadnavis. We have our speaker introducing us to this book that captures all the tax laws, export, import procedure, and compliance, and much more of the gem and jewelry industry. Our speaker, an advocate with over 20 years of experience, has assisted several Indian and multinational corporates across sectors on multifarious securities and tax issues. We have our speaker who has been recommended for his expertise in various fields, including capital market and tax by Legal 500 Asia Pacific, mentioned as a recognized practitioner by Chambers and Partners, and has featured in the International Tax Review's Tax Controversy Leader's Guide and by those who work with him and have handled complex matters. According to Chambers APAC 2022, he is very helpful, client-centric, always available, and a great knowledge and sound advisor. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for our speaker, Mr. Nishant Shah. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon to those present here. This session today is on more than going into what are the legal implications or tax implications, understanding what is this SOP that was unveiled today. And it's important that we understand how this SOP is created, how it will facilitate the industry, and how it will benefit the industry. The session mainly focuses so that we understand that there is a need that everybody moves to this SOP to bring about a uniformity in the industry. So why was this SOP needed? Let's first start with that. If I may request to change the slide. So if you see this, if we see the gold or the gems and jewelry industry, it is a little unique industry. It is unique because every participant in the industry has its own style of operating. More importantly, every output of the industry, every product of the industry cannot be compared with a similar other product. So for example, if there is a manufacturer, say, of a phone, a mobile phone, every two mobile phone will require the same quantum of inputs, it will have the same value of inputs going on and resulting into the same phone which comes through. But one piece of jewelry, even if it's made identical to the other piece of jewelry, the quantum of gold may vary a bit. Some stones may be extra or not, and therefore the two pieces of jewelry cannot be compared and cannot be said as to be the same value. Same is the situation with diamonds, stones, etc. That you may have a packet of diamonds which may have certain number of stones, and the other one may not be exactly the same number of stones. And therefore, what was happening is that when the tax and regulatory authorities were trying to assess or regulate this industry or the industry participants, the issue which was coming up is that they were trying to compare and saying that, oh, so-and-so entity has accounted for their transaction in this manner, and therefore they've paid this much amount of tax. But the adjoining entity has not paid that amount of tax. Why so? The issue was because the industry has so many variations, so many nuances, that it is not possible to compare the two. To put to rest all of these situations, we thought it's important that we create some sort of a SOP or some sort of a booklet which will have different variations that exist in the industry, how those variations should be dealt with, how it should be accounted for, what are the records should be maintained, and how do you therefore then go into applying the different applicable legislations, be it GST, be it income tax, be it FEMA related, foreign exchange related legislations, be it hallmarking. And that's what we've tried to cover in this SOP. So, like I was saying, why was there a need for the SOP? If you go to the previous slide. So, this having given the background, there is One was the diversity that I explained. Second is, while preparing this SOP, we went across to various jurisdictions and we realized that manufacture of a piece of jewelry sometimes takes place at a manufacturing center, sometimes you get it manufactured from karigars or job workers. How a job worker is compensated also varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Like in Maharashtra, it may be piece rate, that number of pieces divided by or multiplied by the rate per piece that the job worker is paid. But somewhere like in Calcutta, whatever is the dust from the gold that comes out, that is calculated as a remuneration to the job worker. In another scenario, like if you see in the south, they have a different manner of calculating how the job worker should be compensated. Now, these variations were also resulting into complications, and that's where there was a requirement that people understand that there are these variations. If you go to the next slide, the other issue which was coming up is that today, any authority that you speak about, for anyone to assess this industry, there is a very extensive need that the person understands the industry well. The person understands the diamond industry, the colored gemstone industry, the gold industry, how the transactions move, how a job worker comes into play, how when you manufacture a jewelry, it's not necessary that the customer will directly buy the jewelry. Sometimes he buys jewelry, he gives you old gold. Or he may have some gold lying spare, he'll pay you in gold and remaining in cash. He may give you certain diamonds that he may have, ask you to use the gold. All of these are variations which come through. But at the end of the day, a piece of jewelry comes through and a certain value is determined and you are required to discharge the tax liability on that. Whether you are able to identify what that is or not is a big situation. So today, if we speak, I don't think there is any authority which has a certain officer who has a complete thorough understanding of how this industry functions. And because of lack of this knowledge, they try to compare or come to a conclusion which is not true for this industry. Because in all of these situations, whether I give certain gold and get a piece of jewelry manufactured, or I buy a direct piece of jewelry, or a karigar manufactures, the end result is the culmination of a piece of jewelry. How that should be understood becomes a big deviation and a big variation, and that was causing a concern. The other aspects were that with the today, a jeweler is existent in every part of the country, in the remotest village of the country. There may be certain villages where you may not find a bank or a branch of a bank, but you will surely find a jeweler because the farmer there, when he earns something and he wants to put his savings, he puts it in gold, he buys some jewelry from the local jeweler. These small-time jewelers, with the digitization coming about in the country, were not able to meet with the digitization on their own. By this SOP, what we are trying to do is, we are trying to bring in the hands of the jeweler the capability of doing his compliances on his own. So that was one more aspect, that when we moved around, we went to a few jurisdictions, and I'll speak in the local language that they said. So they were saying that पहले हमें जब भी compliance करना था, return भरना था, तो इतना हमारे consultant को pay करना पड़ता था, say about 3,000, 5,000. Now that compliance cost has gone to 10,000. This compliance cost increasing because there is digitization, we don't know how to use, or we don't have the facilities to carry out the compliances, and we are required to rely upon an external consultant. Which is where we said, if we have this SOP, it is so simple, and very soon I'll run you through how the SOP has been structured. It is so simple and clear that a smallest of the jeweler, sitting wherever he is, he'll be able to undertake the compliances. And the last issue which was coming up is, like I said, because there were variation in the transactions or the manner in which transactions are carried out, records are maintained in different parts of the country, the tax officer, when he compared two different people, he would come to two different conclusions. Even though it's the same business that they were doing, only their maintenance of records was different. So we are hoping that with this SOP, the tax officer also starts referring to this SOP and reflects on that and brings about consistency in the manner in which he undertakes the audits, assessments of various industry participants. If we move to the next slide, this is just about that why we were brought in to do because we as ELP, a law firm, we've been working with this industry for more than 20 years. We understand the nuances of the industry, and which is where we thought that it is important, and we worked with GJEPC to come out with a culmination of the different variation in the transactions that exist in this industry. अलग-अलग जो भी transaction रहते हैं, हर एक transaction को अगर हम क्लियरली डिफाइन कर दे और उसमें बता दे कि इस तरह का रिकॉर्ड मेंटेनेंस की ज़रूरत है, इस तरह के रिटर्न फाइलिंग की ज़रूरत है, इस तरह के डॉक्यूमेंट्स की ज़रूरत है, इट विल बिकम ईजियर एंड सिंपलर. एंड दैट्स वेयर वी डिसाइडेड दैट इट्स इंपॉर्टेंट वी कम आउट विथ समथिंग कॉल्ड एज एन SOP, especially for the gold jewelry manufacturing industry. How did we come? Now, first is the requirement for the SOP that I explained. What effort went in creating this SOP? We actually, because of the variation in the transactions and the variation in the practices, we actually visited various jurisdictions, including and held meetings with industry participants in Mumbai, Hyderabad, Coimbatore, Rajkot, Ahmedabad, Delhi, Kolkata. These are the major hubs of jewelry manufacturing. During those visits, meetings were not only with jewelers. They were with jewelers, they were with retailers, they were with wholesalers, they were with manufacturers, and in certain cases, they were also with the bullion suppliers, so as to understand where the difficulties and the concerns are coming in. Based on this, we got certain responses. We actually prepared questionnaire, circulated questionnaire, got information from there. We saw downstream documents also which were coming in. And based on this, we came out, post that we had further interactions also, and came out with certain structures. Because when we saw that, okay, a piece of jewelry when communicated by one person or delivered by other person, the delivery challan also varied. And there was a possibility that the officer may say, okay, your delivery challan is correct, but yours is not. And we wanted to avoid that. We didn't want the officers to come with alternate conclusions. So what we did is we picked up all of these, identified common elements, and came out with formats. So you'll see in the SOP that how we've touched upon those formats as well. Next slide, please. So that in turn resulted in the culmination of the SOP. We collated various divergent practices, put all of that together, sort of mapped it on the wall that what are the different situations which are coming through, what are the tax treatment, and what are the basic criterias which need to be kept in mind, because principally if those criterias are followed or understood well, it is very easy to understand what is the nature of this transaction, what is the purpose of this transaction, and what the transaction culminates into. And therefore, if you go to the next slide, Thereafter, we identified what are the current concerning legislations which are impacting this industry. One significant one is customs, because all gold in India is imported, and how the gold is imported and utilized becomes a concern. Second, significant jewelry manufactured is exported, which again forms part of customs. Export of jewelry results into various duty benefits, tax benefits becoming available to the jewelers, and therefore the different schemes which are available under the foreign trade policy were again becoming significant aspects of understanding where the criticality is coming in. The third and the most critical one is the recently introduced goods and service tax, the GST. GST is causing a lot of concerns in the compliances, in the positions, in the tax positions taken. We are having audits, assessments being taken up. We are having scrutiny, etc. being taken up by the authorities. And therefore, it was important that we are very clear on certain tax positions adopted in relation to GST. In fact, during our visits, it was a common implication which was coming in कि GST में हमें किस तरह से documents maintain करने हैं. GST में अगर हम बेच रहे हैं and from the कारीगर्स place, if the goods are going directly to the customer, तो हमें किस तरह से बताना है, क्या हम directly बेच सकते हैं. All of those were becoming concerns where there was not only a need to understand the transaction, but also the underlying documents. Income tax was the other implication, and recently introduced hallmarking. Hallmarking is now gaining more and more momentum, and it's going to become more and more complex. So therefore, that was the other aspect which was becoming critical. Next slide, please. Based on that, we've now come into the SOP which was created. Our attempt has been to make the SOP as comprehensive as possible to cover every kind of transaction that this industry is required to undertake. However, there could be situations that certain transactions may not have been identified. If that is the situation, we request that please write back to GJEPC, and we'll be happy that in the future versions of the SOP that come through, we'll try to incorporate that. So if you see the manner in which the SOP has been laid out, we first have given the methodology so that you're clear on what aspects are covered and what is not covered. Then we've gone into bifurcating into three portions. We said that in this industry, when the functioning is carried out, there is procurement, which is one level, procurement of gold, procurement of various other materials, etc. Thereafter, the manufacturing. Within procurement, again, if you see, there are various ways in which the procurement takes place. There could be simpliciter direct procurement of gold. Or there could be gold received against sale of jewelry, that you have sold a piece of jewelry, but the buyer is not giving you only cash, he is giving you cash and a certain gold which is having, either in the form of a gold coin or pure gold or something like that. Or there is old gold, he has ancestral gold, he gives you ancestral gold which has certain stones as well, and he says reuse these stones to create a piece of jewelry. You may procure gold now from the bullion exchange as well, the IIBX in the gift city. Or there could be procurement under the foreign trade policy where gold has been brought in under loan, etc. And based on that, then there could be availment of various jewelry designing services which are being taken from designers in Singapore, etc. And then what the implications and certain other raw materials. If we go to the next slide, we then have the manufacturing of jewelry. So once procurement is done, the second part was becoming the manufacturing process. Manufacturing either at their own manufacturing location or through a karigar, and or it could be a large scale manufacturing or a small scale manufacturing. Again, within manufacturing, there could be 2-3 situations. We've tried to capture that. And finally, once the jewelry is manufactured, it is sold out. Sales could be retail sales, sales could be wholesale sales, it could be sale on approval, it could be consignment sales. All of those situations were coming in, which becomes then important and critical. And we've tried to cover the different situations in which sale is carried out by the jewelry, by the jewelers in the industry. From sales we come to, there were export sales also. And then if you have export sales, there are various benefits which come through. What is most important is that this SOP also becomes like a ready reckoner. And therefore, if you see, we have a chapter 7 which says that what are the tax rates. Suppose if you are manufacturing, if you are purchasing gold, on gold, what will be the tax rate? If it's jewelry, what is the tax rate? If it's job work, what is the tax rate? Under income tax also, if you have to deduct TDS, then what is the tax rate? Everything is given at one place. And finally, of course, certain formats, etc. Like I said, we've created the format which will be available. So let me run you through some parts of the SOP for you to understand how comprehensive it is and how easy it is to access. And that's mainly on the soft copy. So of the various things that we saw, let me take a simple one, which is the direct procurement. And then we'll take one more, which is the manufacture through job worker, because manufacturing through job worker is one of the most critical one. The scanning code is available. It's outside also. You may scan it, or can you put it again? Some people are scanning it, and if you all, so you can get a soft copy of the SOP by scanning this code itself, and which will have all the accessibility that can be carried out. Shall we move to the SOP itself? The hoarding is there outside also. You'll be able to take the scanning code. It's there on GJEPC website as well. Now, let's see, I had shown the index. So, can you go down on the index? So, we had a message from the Honorable Commerce Minister also, which again supports that, it has the blessings of the Honorable Commerce Minister. Various things. So, let me take one of the simple ones, say direct procurement. Direct procurement. How have we now structured this? If once you click onto the direct procurement, it takes you to the relevant page. The relevant page first gives a background that, how the industry members, based on the structure of the business, procure gold in multiple modes. It could be procured from nominated agencies or banks, or gold could be given by the customer, or the procurement of bullion against sale of jewelry. So, what factually happens in the industry is also explained. Because it was very important, we explained to the officer also, if a tax officer were to understand that how this gold is procured. Second, when we come to direct procurement, we've identified here that, how the direct procurement, so industry members procure gold in purity of 24 carats from nominated agencies and in bullion trading houses on an outright purchase basis. The procured gold is in the form of 995 or 999. Now, how do you procure gold? How do you place your purchase order? Purchase order could be verbal, it could be through the website, or it could be through a written purchase order which is given. So that also was covered, that what are the practices which are followed. Now, gold is a very simple transaction. You are just procuring gold. However, there are certain implications will come in from the GST perspective that, okay, gold when you procure, what is most critical? The criticality is the value, because it's a very high value gold. And whether the value as on the date, or is it a future date, or is it a date which is to be mutually decided, or there is no date. So, we've given that under GST, the valuation rule comes into play. In that, again, the value will be typically the transaction value. So suppose if I'm purchasing gold against on the spot, then whatever is the spot rate will be the rate at which the gold will be calculated. Once you calculate, the supplier will give you an invoice. The invoice will carry the value of gold and the tax which is to be charged, which is the GST. Now, the question comes up that, okay, what is the procedure to be followed? That if you're purchasing gold, what are the documents which come into existence? Then we've given that. Key documents, so supplier is liable to issue a tax invoice. The question was coming up, okay, then in the tax invoice, what should be there? Because today, supplier gives you a tax invoice, you want to take the tax credit. But if the invoice is not appropriate, the GST authority tomorrow will not allow you that credit. So we've highlighted how the credit is to be. If you can go, and if you click that, it will take you to how an invoice. So this gives you that what are the important elements in the invoice which should be there. So it gives you the name and GST number of the supplier, the consecutive serial number, various aspects, so that you can compare and confirm that the invoice is a valid invoice and no tax authority will now question whether I'll be eligible to credit or not if these components are there. If you go back again, so if we go back again here, thereafter what we've given is that, okay, if the turnover is between 5 to 10 CR or now 5 CR, it will have to be an e-invoice from the portal of the authority. So if it's from the portal of the authority, again, what criteria comes into play? If you click that, I'm not clicking that right now, but let's go on the 5th point. Somebody raised a question that if I'm supplying gold, is there a certain format of the invoice which you can help me out with? We've now created a format also. So suppose if there's a small jeweler or even if your systems, you are a little confused whether what should be there in my invoice, not in my invoice, you click on the format, it will actually give you the format. Just fill in these blanks and your format of the invoice as compatible with the applicable legislation is ready and available to be straight away issued out. So the point we are trying to drive home is that this SOP has been made like absolutely comprehensive to cover the simplest and the smallest of the aspect which would be required in relation to the gold jewelry industry. If you can go to the direct procurements. So this was from a GST perspective. If you go down, then if you see the D portion, we've said that sometimes in this industry, when you procure gold, the rate of gold may not be fixed at that point in time. It may be fixed at a future date, but that also a situation arising. And that could result into deviation between the date on which the gold was granted and the date when it is fixed. That could result into issuance of a debit note or a credit note, because when the supplier is giving you gold, he will have to issue an invoice. But that's not the final invoice. That's not the commercially agreed price. The commercially agreed price will be at a future date. That debit note or credit note, if that is issued, उसमें क्या details होनी चाहिए, किस तरह से बनना चाहिए, वो भी हमने दिया हुआ है. And how the credit note, what is the situation in which the credit note is issued, credit note में क्या include होगा, क्या नहीं होगा, वो यहाँ पे बताया हुआ है. If you go to the next slide, please, next page. So this gives, and if you see on the point number 5 again, particulars to be mentioned in the debit and credit note. Again, we've given that also. कि अगर आप debit credit note दे रहे हैं, as per law, क्या-क्या चीजें उसमें होनी चाहिए, क्या नहीं होनी चाहिए, what should be covered, not covered, so that it's an appropriate this. Do you want to click that once? So it will take us to the, this is the contents of the debit note, credit note again, that you should have these contents covered in your debit note, credit note. Can you go back? So this was a simple transaction from a procurement perspective. Go back to procurements. Up, direct procurement, yeah. So this is all on GST. If you go to the next slide, then next page, then we've gone into, on the GST itself, there will be input tax. Because you've purchased gold, you have an invoice, you will take input tax credit of the tax GST charged by the supplier. What are the conditions for that? And other nuances. Other nuances, for example, you may procure gold from X, but you may tell the supplier that you supply the gold directly to my karigar, because the karigar will manufacture the jewelry and the karigar will directly sell to the customer. The gold will never come into your hands. Whether you are allowed to do that, and if you do that, how should your invoice reflect? In that situation, what is known as a bill to ship to invoice will have to be issued. So the supplier will bill to you, but ship to your karigar. So those nuances are also given because that's an industry reality which happens. From karigar, how it goes, that's given into another chapter when we go to the karigar chapter. So all of the nuances also that exist in relation to even a simple transaction of procurement of gold have been captured in this SOP. After GST, we've touched upon income tax. Income tax, no significant implications, but today now, any procurement that you make, there is a TDS implication. So when you are making payment to your supplier, there will be a 0.1% TDS implication, which again we've given. We've also gone to the point to say that, okay, if you're deducting TDS, when should you deposit the TDS with the government? Can you click on that? So it gives a timeline on when your TDS deduction should be carried out, what is the form you will be using for TDS deduction, what is the date by which the TDS return will be filed. Can you go back? From the income tax, then we'll come to hallmarking. Hallmarking obviously is just a procurement of gold, so there are no implications for hallmarking. Obviously, there is no import or export in this, and therefore there is no FTP or customs related issue coming in. But wherever that situation comes in, we've touched upon hallmarking and customs related issues as well. Now let's take another little complicated transaction that when you are sending to job workers. I just want to explain that, you know, how complex or variant this industry is and how much we've tried to capture. So let's go to manufacturing of jewelry through job workers. Now, when we worked on this job worker manufacturing thing, because getting manufacturing done through job worker is a routine aspect in this industry. But what is unique is that there are different practices of the manner in which you compensate the karigar or the job worker. And we've tried to capture that also. So if you see, A, B, C are three different situations, where in one of the situations, fixed percentage of wastage plus labor charges. It is one of the common practices that the process loss which comes through, that process loss becomes, because there is some dust which comes out, that dust is the income of the karigar, and you then pay certain processing charges. The combination of those two is the payment that you make to the karigar. Now the issue comes up, when you've made the payment in that manner, what is the invoice that the karigar will raise? Will the karigar raise the invoice only for the value in cash, that is the actual wages you're paying, or also the dust? And if it's also the dust, what is the value of the dust? Is the dust to be valued at the price at which you procured the gold, or the current date price that the karigar is now getting the dust? Again, that becomes a discrepancy. All of that is captured in this. I'm not getting through each of this, but similarly, these have been analyzed into valuation aspect, what is the document, how the document would reflect, how he should call his income. Because karigar's invoice to you will become your input credit, and you will take GST on that. If that invoice is wrong and the department finds any issue, they will deny your credit as well.